After the death of her husband, Margaret Davidson found herself alone. She had married while her husband was a director in a prominent steel mill. As the years passed, upon her husband's death, he left her a substantial inheritance, including the large, elegantly furnished apartment that Margaret occupied, as well as the smaller apartment in which my wife and I now reside. Although the inheritance included automobiles, Margaret decided to sell them because she had a fear of machinery and disliked them. Throughout her long marriage, she held the belief that physical intimacy with a man was merely an unpleasant and burdensome duty for a woman. It was difficult for her to understand women who, when married, preferred to engage in extramarital affairs. Although there were times when she felt a deep physical desire and even discomfort from it, she did not associate these feelings with men. One day, a faucet in the bathroom broke at the most inopportune moment, and torrents of hot water rained down on her. In a hurry, she called her brother-in-law, who lived nearby, and asked him to help shut off the water. She promised him a generous reward if he would solve the problem the same day. Knowing Margaret's penchant for generosity, he readily agreed, anticipating tasty treats and a solid helping of fine whiskey. He hurried with surprising speed to her house. He went down to the basement and, having turned off the hot water supply, climbed back up to her apartment. The breakdown was fixed in a flash. While a satisfied Margaret fussed about gathering treats for the table, her son-in-law, John, went back down to the basement and turned on the hot water. Walking back upstairs, John thought about his marriage, which was not going well. His wife had a lover, and from his arguments with her, he realized she was going to file for divorce. In truth, John knew that the poor marital relationship was his own fault. No woman would put up with a perpetually drunk husband. As he walked up the stairs, he couldn't help but think of Margaret. She was still good-looking and, most importantly, unmarried. A woman like that, if properly cared for, would make a good life for herself. And she had the money she'd inherited from her late husband. She just paid him without a second thought. Money was good, but what really intrigued him was her. She was smooth and luscious, a single woman without a man. John wanted to be with her. That thought was reinforced when Margaret, sitting across from him, blushed from her glass of whiskey. She didn't notice that her rope kept trying to slip down. John began to think how he could win her over. When Margaret poured them both another glass of whiskey, John didn't hesitate to toast their newfound connection. She looked at him strangely and asked, "Do we have to kiss afterward?" John only smiled and raised his glass. They drank, and then John kissed Margaret passionately. She didn't resist, wrapped her hot arms around him, and pulled him tightly to her chest. "Don't go now," she whispered. "Stay with me." It was then that John confessed how bad things were with his wife, that she had a lover, and they were on the verge of divorce. "I don't play any role in her life anymore," John sadly remarked, and then added, "And yet, why didn't I notice you sooner? We've lost so much precious time." In response, Margaret hugged him tighter. "If you want, John, you can stay. We can share our lives together." "I want that very much, my dear," John affirmed. John eventually finalized the divorce and now lives with Margaret with no qualms about his decision. John's life took a sharp turn. When he moved in with Margaret, he felt a sense of stability he hadn't known in years. Margaret, despite her age, was lively, full of energy, and affectionate in ways John never expected. She cared for him, treated him well, and they fell into a routine that seemed almost natural, though unconventional. Their relationship had begun in a whirlwind of mystery and impulse, but over time, it had grown into something deeper. What began as a lustful attraction quickly grew into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared loneliness. Margaret, once a widow who associated physical intimacy only with marital duty, found herself awakening new feelings, desires she had long buried. John, in turn, rediscovered a part of himself that had been slumbering during his failed marriage. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Margaret's fortune allowed them to live comfortably, and their relationship remained a secret from friends and family. But soon the outside world began to put pressure on them. Gossip began, questions about why John had not returned to his wife and why he was spending so much time at his mother-in-law's house. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the cityscape, a message from his ex-wife, Emily, appeared on John's phone. Rumors had reached her, of course, but that wasn't what the message was about. Instead, it was about divorce proceedings and the division of property. As John read the message, Margaret noticed the change in expression on his face. "Is everything okay?" asked Margaret, her voice soft but concerned. "It's Emily." "The divorce is going faster than I thought," John replied, looking at the screen. "She's asking for a larger settlement." Margaret sipped her wine and thought for a moment. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly, staring out at the horizon. John turned to her, startled by the question. "Regret what?" "About leaving her," Margaret said, her tone more serious than usual. "Being with me." John paused. The easiest thing to do would have been to answer no. After all, his marriage to Emily had fallen apart long before his relationship with Margaret had begun. But in the back of his mind, he realized that there was a price to pay for the path he had chosen, with all its secrets and taboos. "I don't regret being with you," John finally said, taking her hand. "But it's hard." Margaret nodded, realizing what he couldn't say. Complicated was an understatement. Their relationship had been built on circumstances no one could ever understand. And while there was something real connecting them now, it didn't change the fact that he was her former son-in-law, something that society, and perhaps their own consciences, couldn't easily come to terms with. As the days passed, Margaret began to feel the weight of their relationship in ways she had not expected. She had always been strong, independent, and self-sufficient, but now there was a vulnerability in her that she couldn't shake off. She loved John, but she couldn't ignore the fact that their future was uncertain.